the stars out tonight? I don't know if it's cloudy or bright.
Ask, Believe, and Receive, the spiritual journey of Toni Carroll Tierman. Would you believe this gorgeous woman used her mind to become an oil tycoon, president of her own oil company, and even owned a ship? It's all about belief and using your mind to manifest what you want in your life. Ask, believe, and receive. That's exactly what Toni Carroll did. She made up her mind she wanted to make money to give back, so she used the power of her mind to hit oil 5 times. This is a true story. You will see proof. Toni's story is a great example for all of us on how we can use our minds to change our lives for the better. We all have this power. If you ask Toni how she did it, she will say she worked at it. She spent several hours a day praying and meditating. You can do it too. So let's get started on an amazing story of how this gorgeous Copa girl, a singer and a dancer, struck oil over and over again.
That sweet melody called a doodly-doo, a doodly-doo. I like the rest, but what I like best is a doodly-doo, a doodly-doo. Simplest thing.
Toni Carroll was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Born a twin, Toni could just as easily have become an orphan. Her father was killed in a snowstorm. His dying words to Toni's young mother was, "Put the twins in an orphanage." Toni was 2 years old when she went to northern Italy to live with her grandparents. There Toni learned Italian and easily adjusted. She became one of 8 children living in a large chalet in Italy where she was raised Catholic. It was at age 8 that Toni returned to St. Louis with her mom and quickly learned English. Toni's interest in show business started when she was helping her mom do laundry in the basement. Always inquisitive, Toni found stacks of newspapers in the corner. She was attracted immediately to the show business section. Toni learned a lot reading those newspaper articles, and this little girl put everything she learned to good use. Today we have talent shows on TV that can launch a recording career. Trending on the internet can make someone a star overnight. In the 60s, it was the Copacabana in New York City. If a girl was pretty enough, talented enough, and lucky enough to land a job at the Copacabana, her career would launch like a rocket. Toni saved every newspaper article she read over the years about the Copa. Thankfully, Toni's grade school teacher, Miss Moore, noticed Toni's amazing voice and gave her voice training by keeping Toni at school an extra hour a day. All the while, Toni's doing laundry and collecting every newspaper article she can find about the Copa. Creative and enterprising beyond her years, Toni put the articles about the Copa into an album. Toni decides she'll conquer her dream. She takes off to New York City in the famed Copacabana. She boldly walks into the office and announces she's Miss Toni Carroll. She presents her photo album to a very surprised gentleman, used to pretty girls wanting to be chosen to be a Copa girl. He becomes engrossed in the years of newspaper articles about himself and the famous nightclub, the Copacabana. Toni, always focused and ready, speaks up. "Am I pretty enough to be a Copa girl?" Toni asks. He glances up from the album and quickly replies, "You're a little too tall. We'll put you in the middle." Toni Carroll was on her way to stardom. Toni Carroll did become a star, a big star. She traveled the world, wowing audiences when she took the stage with her rich voice and that sexy figure in those sleek gowns. Toni knew how to keep them smiling, too. Her shows resembled a musical comedy with the mix of her infectious sense of humor and that sexy, smooth voice. The little girl from Missouri now belonged to the world. Singing and looking fabulous was easy for Toni. She had envisioned herself as a star, and now Toni Carroll was a star. She recorded albums, many albums, that are sold today on Amazon. All of this came from what a little girl learned sitting in spiritual meetings in her neighborhood back in Missouri.
Come una fiaba, l'amore passa, c'era una volta.
She learned at the age of 7 that for fun, she could use her mind to make a picture fall off the wall. Don't believe it? Try it. It's hard mental work, but it can be done. Toni had found her power, and she loved it. Things began to really change one night when Toni was singing at a club in Washington, D.C. It was after the show. Toni said a gentleman with knowing eyes asked her, "Have you ever heard of Edgar Cayce?" "No," Toni replied. But little did she know that name would change her life forever. The man told her of a book, There Is a River, by Tom Segru. He, for some reason, had a strong feeling that Toni might like that book. Toni mentions this to Elaine Buttons, the wife of comic Red Buttons, who immediately said, "I have the book. I'll bring it to you." Toni absorbed every word of the book. Toni yearned for more about the metaphysical world and the hundreds of psychic readings of Edgar Cayce, known as the Psychic of Virginia Beach. So what does the successful Copa girl do? Toni immediately packs up and flies to Virginia Beach to go to the Edgar Cayce library. Toni was taken with what she had read. She simply says, "I had to see it with my own eyes." In Virginia Beach, Toni studied the readings of Edgar Cayce. She absorbed all of the information. Meanwhile, Toni has a successful singing career and is being booked out of an agency in New York City. Toni was always booked at glitzy places, so she was puzzled when her taxi driver took her to the St. Clair Inn in St. Clair, Michigan. Why would her agent book her there? After all, Toni was used to playing the Copa, the Latin Quarters, and being on television. It only took a few minutes, and Toni started to pick up vibrations. It became apparent to her while she was there. She knew in her heart that her future would reveal itself there. She was right. Toni used what she had learned in Virginia Beach from the Edgar Cayce readings, and Toni concentrated on what she wanted. Toni had made up her mind. She had a goal. She wanted to give money to the Edgar Cayce Library in Virginia Beach and help make paranormal psychology more mainstream. Toni was right about her future unfolding. It started when she walked into the St. Clair Inn to rehearse one night. A man called out, asking if she was that singer from New York City. It was Pop Whitney and his son Jack, 2 oil men. Pop Whitney was a local, and he knew everything there was to know about oil. Toni always loved science and the earth, probably from her early years in Italy and her grandfather's farm. Pop Whitney was mesmerized. What oil man wouldn't be taken by a beautiful singer that seemed so interested in the oil business? Pop gladly told Toni everything she needed to know. That's when Toni the Star was about to earn the new title, Toni the Wildcatter. Toni made up her mind. She's going into the oil business. That will be her way of making the money she needs to give to the Edgar Cayce Library in Virginia Beach. Toni's wishes started to come true. The St. Clair was packed every night with people that wanted to see the pretty singer from New York City that was in the oil business. They were all eager to meet her after hearing her sing. They would come up after her show and give her rights to drill on their land. Toni knew what she was doing at Strikes Oil, giving them an income for life. They loved her so much, they made her an honorary citizen. Never losing sight of her goal, Toni stays focused, singing at night and gathering available oil and gas leases during the day. This meant knocking on the door of farmers. Toni once again was prepared and had used her self-discipline. She studied the townships and the families that lived there. She had learned to put together a prospectus, thanks to Pop Whitney. Using her divine methods of meditation, she knew which doors to knock on. Toni was easily recognizable in town, too. There were lots of newspaper articles written about the psychic singer in their small town. The newspaper reporters went crazy with headlines that read, "Singer drills for oil." Can you imagine living in a rural farming area and this beauty knocks on your door? With a big smile, Toni would tell them she wanted to work with them and that she knew how to make money on their land. They treated her like royalty, turning over 650 acres for no money or $1 an acre. One day soon after that, Toni notices Fawn Island on a map and feels strong vibration. She convinces Pop Whitney to take her there. She becomes friends with Mr. Brady, a man that was born there and knew the area well. He owned a marina restaurant and motel in southwestern Ontario, Canada. Mr. Brady's restaurant was called Diamond Jim Brady's. It was the kind of place the men loved to gather. Toni instantly makes good friends with the locals. They all fall in love with the beautiful psychic singer from the Copacabana that knew all about the oil business. Toni does mean business too. Armed with her available information, Toni talks with the locals and manages to gather about 1,000 acres worth of oil and gas leases. Toni had it all figured out. For $51,000, you could buy a fourth of one of the $1 million wells from Toni's company. Yes, Toni's company. She was now incorporated and the president of Blackfoot Oil. Toni made her oil deal sound irresistible. For an investment of only $20,000 you could drill. If the well was dry in the 60s, it was 100% deductible. The wells were worth millions if they hit oil. Toni Carroll was certainly more than a pretty face. A little later on, the New York City office booked Toni to sing at the Saddle and Sirloin in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Once again, Toni wondered why her agent booked her there. The answer came quickly. The Saddle and the Sirloin was a men's-only club. Wouldn't you just know it? It was an oil man's club. After her performance one night, Toni hands her boss her prospectus and asks him to read it. He was very interested, since the oil wells in Louisiana are extremely deep and expensive to drill. She tries to convince him the wells in Michigan and northwest Ontario, Canada, were shallow and prolific. Still, the oil man seemed a little hesitant. So what does this beautiful wildcatter do? She invites him to come as her guest, with their lawyers, to Michigan and southwest Ontario, Canada. They went. Who wouldn't? All of Toni's believing paid off. Toni strikes oil. The oil well was gushing on Fawn Island, and the headlines were buzzing about the beautiful Copa girl singer that had struck oil. As fast as the oil was gushing, Toni's story was catching on. The little girl from Missouri made the front page of the Wall Street Journal and the Oil and Gas News. Toni's agent read about her and her oil projects. Her agent decides to book her for an appearance on the Johnny Carson TV show. That night, Johnny Carson had Joe Garagiola and Yogi Berra as his guests, both from St. Louis, Missouri. You can watch these shows at copagirl.com and on YouTube and iTunes. So what does a beautiful oil tycoon need now? Maybe a ship. An associate brings Toni an offer to buy a fabulous ship, the Asina Boya, once a famous cruise ship. At that time, it was in dry dock, being sold to the highest bidder. The Asina Boya once held 125 passengers. a very beautiful and historical ship. Toni was reluctant to participate, but having eager business partners, she ended up getting in on their offer. Toni, not really wanting to get into the shipping business, went along with a really low bid. Wouldn't you know it, they won. Now Toni's in the oil and shipping business. But shipping was something she didn't enjoy. She didn't care for the stress of a barrage of attorneys and a world she wasn't interested in. Toni Carroll was an oil woman. Her strong instincts tell her this ship is a mistake. This ship is costing money every minute. Toni is convinced that she needs to sell the ship right away. Can you imagine trying to sell a cruise ship? Always keeping her focus, she advertises her ship in the Wall Street Journal. Toni was right again. The next day the phone rings. It's a wealthy Greek that wants to buy her ship. Now Toni can get back to her main focus, making money in the oil business. Toni is busy singing in the clubs in the evenings and spending her daylight hours concentrating and meditating for her psychic abilities. Toni will tell you that she worked hard. It wasn't easy to spend hours concentrating, praying, believing, and receiving her psychic vibrations and information. It was worth it, though. Can you imagine the pressure and excitement Toni felt as she waited for them to drill where she had chosen using her psychic abilities? Toni says she will never forget when she checked into a hotel in Tavistock, Ontario, Canada, to await the drilling of one of her wells. She slept on the top of the covers that night, tossing. Suddenly, the whole town is awakened by the thunderous noise as the well gushed. Toni remembers vividly the sight of glorious oil blowing upward towards the sky. Toni laughs and says her false eyelashes were all over the place that night. Toni Carroll was a real oil woman. Most would say a tycoon. All of the farmers were so happy, they loved her. And what is there not to love? So the oil gushed, the money rolled in, but Toni didn't forget her mission. She made a donation to the Association of Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach and became a life member. She also went on to become a divine science minister. Toni's spiritual journey led her to study the paranormal and healing through using love and prayer. Toni, being musically gifted and now highly in touch with her psychic creativity, produced an album called Musical Chords to affect and heal through the spinal cord. Toni describes it as physically using the spinal cord, acting as piano chords, to heal using mental and spiritual concentration. By now, Toni is at a point in her life that she is extremely creative. Being vocally trained, Toni realizes that the cello is the closest sound to the human voice. Toni feels strongly that cellos and voices would raise the vibration in man. Seeking to give love and healing, Toni wrote and arranged songs called Toni Carroll and the Dresky Cellos, which is available on the internet. Today, lovely as ever, Toni Carroll is now Toni Carroll Tierman. She's happily married and lives in New York City with her husband, Dr. Philip Tierman. Toni's radiant today. You know the minute you meet her that she's special. Toni still dances and exercises daily. After such an interesting and glamorous life, you might ask, what would be one of her favorite memories? Toni says it was a time when she was drilling her well in Sombra, Ontario, Canada. She said it was a very small community with a bank so small It was the size of a dollhouse. People in this small town weren't wealthy. They'd probably never seen a woman as beautiful as Toni Carroll either. Can you imagine the shock when she walked into their tiny bank and deposited $20,000? She said the man at the bank went bananas with excitement and disbelief. Toni said he broke out with feverish red spots on his face. One has to wonder, was it the amount of the money or Toni's good looks that caused the banker's fever? Since we all have a few regrets, you might ask what this supercharged psychic beauty could possibly regret. No real regrets, just a tale of a boyfriend she had in New York City in the 60s. Toni was so engrossed in her life, he became impatient and ran off with one of her girlfriends that was a dancer. Toni says he decided she was nuts. That boyfriend probably has a lot of regrets. Toni has used her life to empower herself, make money, and give back. Today, Toni is gorgeous and moves around like a 16-year-old. Ask how she spends her time these days. You'll be told, having fun. Toni glows with inner peace and love. Toni is a treasure, a lovely lady, author, and lecturer. Toni and her husband Philip sometimes performed together. How many women in history have ever done what Toni Carroll has done? From almost nothing, she became a Copa girl, oil tycoon, and a paranormal psychology sensation. What's in the future for Toni Carroll Tierman? Maybe a movie, she says with a grin. What a movie that would be. A beautiful little girl, almost an orphan, but goes on to become an international success. Ask if she remembers her first psychic experience, and she will tell you. It was in her mother's womb. Toni says she remembers thinking, what if I don't get born? What will I do? Go back to where I came, she thought. Toni's always been spiritually in tune. She describes her life as an unending, glowing light journey that has been extremely intoxicating. As you look back on the pieces of Toni's extraordinary life, it looks like a puzzle, a divinely designed puzzle. Toni will tell you that she feels that her future somehow has been laid out for her conveniently by God. She had simply to believe and walk the path that God laid out before her. Many people become stars and they can't handle success. They lead a life of excess and lose sight of what's important in life. Toni Carroll never forgot the most important thing in life, and that's our spirit. Toni Carroll's story is true and powerful. It's an inspirational story that reminds us of the power of the Spirit to manifest good. Ask, believe, and receive. It's sure working for Toni Carroll.
Are the stars out tonight? I don't know if it's cloudy or bright. I only have eyes for you, dear. The moon may be high, but I can't see a thing in the sky.